Good afternoon. We're Group21, consisting out of Bemelmans, Jelle, Goos, and Georgeena Regan. Today, we will talk about snapping's quality of governance. To do so, we will talk about part 1 of the assignment. We will talk about snapping's capital structure, about the corporate governance concerns from the perspective of the founders, the stockholders, and the stakeholders. Then we will talk about snapping's defense for non-voting stock. And finally, we will talk about other corporate governance aspects. But first, let's talk about snapping's capital structure. There are different types of capital structures, such as multi-voting shares. In this structure, more than 2 classes of shares are issued. The difference between these classes is that some classes have more voting rights than other classes. Classes where stockholders have fewer rights than the amount of stock held are subordinate classes, while classes where stockholders have more voting rights relative to stock held are defined as superior classes. Snap Inc. has 3 classes of stock, namely Stock A, Stock B, and Stock C. Firstly, Stock A. With Stock A, the holder of the stock will get no voting rights. This can be seen as a subordinate class. This is the only stock that is available in Snapchat's IPO. Secondly, in Class B, the holder of the stock will get 1 vote. And finally, in Class C, 1 share will give you 10 votes. This stock class is only held by the co-founders Spiegel and Murphy. This means that although Class B and Class C both have voting powers, almost all choices can be determined by the co-founders, as they are a superior class of stock. Now we will go to Jelle, who will talk about the corporate governance concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. So what are the governance concerns that arise for the wide variety of shareholders and stock and stakeholders? But first of all, let's have a look at the founder's perspective, because it seems to be a very good structure for them, as they have access to the stock market while keeping the control of their firm. Next, please. However, if we look from the perspectives of the stockholders and the stakeholders, then we see that several issues can be mentioned in the case of no voting rights. First of all, agency issues. The first concern with respect to the corporate governance would be agency issues that might arise since the stockholders are fully surrendered to the management. Second, private benefits. It is founded that managers with control rights over cash flows are more likely to enjoy private benefits at the cost of stakeholders. In this case, for Snap, this could happen since the co-founders of Snap control all voting outcomes. Third of all, free cash flow problems. These could arise as the co-founders can find growth more important than maximizing economic returns of stakeholders. And finally, lack of accountability. This capital structure might create a separation of ownership and control, which might lead to a lack of accountability. So we see these 4 concerns, and several institutions, such as the CFA and the Council of Institutional Investors, mention that they believe that each stockholder has the right to vote equally. And in addition to this, also for employees who get Stock A shares, cannot cast any votes, so they might feel a lack of trust, which is obviously not benefiting the company culture. Next, please. So now it gets interesting, because in the last slide I explained the concerns, and in the next slide I will explain how Snap is defending their choice for non-voting stock offerings. Next, please. So how do they defend their choice for non-voting stock offerings? Ultimately, this has everything to do with the misalignment of vision. Spiegel and Robert Murphy want to be in control and mentioned that it would take simply too long to explain stakeholders their vision of growth. Next, please. On the one hand, we see that founders do not agree with the beliefs of stockholders, which mentioned that value maximization would be achieved by growing in terms of users, just like Facebook is doing, as you can see. Next, please. And on the other hand, we see that the founders want to focus on consumer engagement and creativity as the best strategy for growth. And according to them, this will provide the best economics returns at the end of the day. Let me mention one thing extra. This does not mean that the founders of Snap completely exclude their stockholders, because yes, they do not have the same voting rights and transfer rights, but they can attend annual meetings and raise their voice, of course. In the next slide, Goos is going to go more in depth and look at the different aspects of corporate governance that are affected. So back to you, Goos.
Yeah, thank you, Jelle. Indeed, I want to talk about the other corporate governance aspects. On the next slide, we can see that there are 3 of them. The first one is the board of directors, which is a strength of Snap's corporate governance. While theory states, for example, Papadopoulos in 2019, that firms with dual class shares often lack independent leadership, Snap shows that and states in their governance guidelines that it appoints independent directors, being as chairman. This is a strength of the corporate governance. However, when we look at CEO compensation policy, this is a weakness. Why? Spiegel's salary is fully based on performance pay, and this is not a problem per se, but the criteria that determine this performance pay are set by Spiegel and the board of directors, which basically means that Spiegel is determining his own salary. Is clearly a weakness of the corporate governance. And lastly, the payout policy is also a weakness of Snap's governance. Why? It's stating that it's using all its income as retained earnings and does not use disciplining tools with dividend, meaning that they don't defend against cash flow problems like empire building or personal use of resources by the management. And to summarize on the next slide, Georgeena has talked about the class A, B, and C shares. She explained that the founders of Snap are holding mostly the class C shares while issuing the class A shares with no voting. This leads to multiple corporate governance problems for stakeholders and stockholders. However, the founders believe that they should keep the control, pursue their own vision, and then that will lead to the most firm value. And other than the share and stakeholders' concerns, we saw that the board of directors policy has a positive effect on corporate governance of Snap, while the CEO compensation and payout policy has a negative effect on the quality of the governance. And with that said, I want to thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation.